Israel has both the right and responsibility to defend itself, but it also has a responsibility to act proportionately and within international law. And I think there are mounting questions about whether Israel is doing that.
On Yemen strikes, does Labour support, and would you continue to support further strikes?
Yes, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the Houthi rebel attacks both on commercial shipping in the Red Sea, but also on HMS Diamond, one of our Royal Naval vessels, necessitated this robust response, targeted, focus, but also absolutely clear that the UK will act in our national interest and to protect international commercial shipping, which I think is our responsibility. So we do support this action, and it's important, I think, on this that the UK speaks with one voice.
And obviously Parliament is going to get a say on this on Monday, but if there were any new attacks, any fresh attacks, would you expect Parliament to be consulted on that first?
I mean, I'd be surprised if there is opposition within Parliament. I think we can see that the Houthi attacks have been completely unjustified, unacceptable, and I think anyone reasonable would expect any British government to act in our national self-defence. That is the first responsibility of our government, is the security of its citizens, security of the nation. We understand why in this case the Prime Minister had to act fast with our international allies without reference to Parliament. Of course, it's always preferable on military action if Parliament can be consulted, but again, anyone reasonable would understand why in some cases, whether it's the urgency of a response or the element of surprise, why it won't always be possible for Parliament to be consulted in advance. But the Prime Minister is coming to Parliament on Monday, and that's the right thing to do.
There are some who suggest that these attacks, these Houthi attacks in the Red Sea, are part of the Israel-Gaza conflict, that's certainly what the Houthis are suggesting that this is about. Do you buy that?
I don't think we should be making excuses for the Houthis. They have chosen to attack international commercial shipping and also chose to unleash an attack on HMS Diamond, on one of our own vessels, on our serving personnel, the people who put themselves in harm's way to keep us safe. So I think there does have to be a response. It has to be robust, targeted, and I think it has been, and that's why the Labour Party supports it. And people should be in no doubt whatsoever that if Keir Starmer were Prime Minister, he would have taken the same action decisively, quickly, to protect Britain's interests.
I mean, on Israel, it's 100 days since the attacks on October the 7th. There's still no end in sight. Israel are still attacking Gaza in many places. Are they still completely justified in taking that action?
I think we're all concerned about the mounting civilian casualties and whether this action is proportionate compared to the threat. I think the October 7th attacks were barbaric, completely unjustified, and we shouldn't lose sight of the nature of the horror that was inflicted on innocent Israelis. So in that context, Israel has both the right and responsibility to defend itself, but it also has a responsibility to act proportionately and within international law. And I think there are mounting questions about whether Israel is doing that, not least given the statements we've seen from senior Israeli government officials who seem to have broader war aims beyond self-defence, the return of hostages and the degradation of Hamas. And I think it's particularly concerning to see the Israeli government distancing itself from the two-state solution and the Palestinians' legitimate right to freedom, self-determination and statehood.
I mean, we saw a huge number of people on the streets again over the weekend, many of whom are concerned about the future for Palestinians. They're concerned about what's happening in Gaza. What is your message to the Israelis, given what you've just said?
I think the message has got to be act responsibly, act within international law, and think about the long-term future for Israelis and Palestinians here. I don't think there is a future for the Israelis or the Palestinians that involves a permanent subjugation of the Palestinian people and the occupation of Palestinian lands. It is both, for For the Palestinians, it is their right, the same right any of us would expect to freedom and self-determination. But I'd also say to the Israeli government and to Israelis, this is also in Israel's long-term interest for peace and security too. I don't see any peaceful solution long-term that is a one-state solution. And that's why I think we've got to redouble diplomatic efforts, both to ensure the return of the hostages who are still being held, and we've had some absolutely horrifying accounts of the way hostages have been treated in captivity. So I think we've got to get the return of the hostages, but also a return to the negotiating table and a peaceful two-state solution.
There were many on the streets this weekend cheering the Houthis for attacking ships in the Red Sea. There were chants like, "Thank you, Yemen, turn another ship around." I mean, what do you make of that? What should the government do about that kind of chanting?
I don't think people would be chanting for the Houthis if they had to live under their rule in Yemen. I think people should be under no illusion about what kind of regime this is and what kind of bloodshed that they have inflicted. I think it is extraordinarily irresponsible and naive. And I dare say, as we've seen on previous marches like this, these sorts of idiotic and in some cases quite frightening statements of support for despotic regimes, I think, are a distraction from the majority of people who've been on these marches, who are marching for peace, for Palestinian human rights, and for Palestinian freedom. And I always think that on these sorts of marches and demonstrations, it's a shame when an ugly minority distract from the message of the majority, and I wouldn't tar everyone there with the same brush.
Yeah. A lot of the things that we've just been talking about, international conflicts, what's happening around the world right now, is likely to increase immigration. It's likely to make more people want to leave the countries they're in and move to other nations. The UK may well be one of those. I mean, is Labour still fully committed to scrapping the Rwanda scheme if you do get into government, given clearly there are other countries around the world now looking to similar deterrent schemes to try and answer this question?
We genuinely don't think the Rwanda scheme will work. We think it is a gimmick, and the only flights that have taken off so far are flights carrying Home Secretaries with hundreds of millions of pounds of taxpayers' money without a single deportation. And let's bear in mind that even if this scheme does get up and running in the way the government says it will, and that's highly questionable, we're going to see only a fraction of new arrivals going to Rwanda. So I think we've got to look at the more serious and substantial responses. You're right to say that population movements are often driven by global events. That's why Britain needs to be engaged in the world and use our position as a development superpower to try and make sure that we deal with conflicts at source. But in terms of our immigration system itself, the money that's being spent on Rwanda would be better spent in the National Crime Agency, smashing the criminal gangs, using counter-terrorism powers, as Keir Starmer has said, to tackle these criminal gangs, speeding up the processing of applications, looking at where we can, how to improve the application process so that people may be able to apply from overseas. But these are all things, I think, practical things that would make a real difference. Rwanda is a gimmick from a government that's approaching its end after 14 years having failed to deal with this problem, and they hope that a scheme that's barely off the ground and up and running, they can sell to the British people as, don't worry, trust us, it'll be okay after the election. I don't think people will fall for it.
Yeah, it looks as if you're going to end up voting down the government's plans alongside Robert Jenrick and Suella Braverman. Not a very good look, that, is it?
Well, I think it's fair to say we're on slightly different pages than Suella Braverman on this. Sometimes there is a coincidence of opposition for very different reasons. And look, one thing I'll say about Conservative rebels is they've often been all mouth, no trousers. These rebellions often disintegrate, and no doubt that's what the Prime Minister will be counting on. We are about to see the legislation this week in detail. There will be amendments. We'll see what happens during the scrutiny process. But I think it's the fundamentals of this plan that are flawed, and we need a more serious plan that maybe isn't as gimmicky or headline grabbing. I think that would be a good thing. We want, most importantly, a system that works, and that's what we're committed to.
Speaking of headline grabbing, you had your proposal this week on children's dental care with what exactly is the plan for toothbrushing lessons in schools. Is that right?
It's part of a wider package of Labour's dentistry rescue plan. It's also 700,000 emergency appointments so that people can get to see a dentist, incentives to recruit dentists in areas that are most poorly served, because I think there is enormous regional variation. I think particularly about the northeast and the southwest, which are particularly poorly served. And as for supervised toothbrushing, I mean, it makes me chuckle a bit that it's the bit of Labour's health policies which has probably attracted the most debate and yet is the cheapest. I think it'd be really cost effective. You look at the fact that children aged between 6 and 10 are going to hospital and being admitted because of tooth decay, and this isn't just a feature of hospital admissions. It is the number one reason why children are being admitted.
Well, possibly because they can't get to dentists, so
tool.
It might be why they're being admitted.
That's true. That's true, Adam. That's absolutely true. But I think we've got to do two things. One is to rebuild NHS Dentistry to make sure it's back on its feet and fit for the future. That will take time, although those 700,000 extra appointments will make a real, immediate, practical difference. So that's important. But I would say on the toothbrushing, and it applies more broadly to Labour's public health policies, we've got to get better at prevention, not just treating illness and sickness, but preventing it in the first place. That's how we not only keep people healthy and happy, but we have an NHS that's sustainable for the long term, because we can't keep on paying the price for failure.
It is the nanny state, though, saying to parents in this case and to people in general, you don't know how to look after yourself.
No, it's not. Don't be daft. It's a daft term, nanny state, anyway. But no, it's simply a recognition that, of course, it's parents' responsibility to brush their children's teeth. But where they are not doing that, and we know it's not happening, what do we say? Oh, sorry, little Timmy or Tommy, because your parents aren't any good, we're going to let your teeth rot and fall out. And we're going to and also let you end up in the hospital, and we're going to pay through the nose for your hospital admission because we couldn't be bothered to act in the first place. If that were the case, then why do we bother with child protection? In fact, why do we bother educating children at all? We could just say that's for their parents, but we left those ideas behind in the 19th and early 20th centuries, and I think it's time for us to leave this daft idea that making sure kids' teeth don't rot is some sort of overreach by the state. I think this is bonkers, and this is a both cost-effective and practical way of keeping children's teeth clean and keeping them out of hospital.
Labour's Wes Streeting, Shadow Health Secretary, thank you very much indeed.